"Marry me tonight," the stranger said quietly in the middle of the hospital hallway, as if it were the most ordinary sentence in the world. Lily Harper thought she must have misheard him. Just seconds earlier, she had been sitting in the crowded waiting area of Westbridge Memorial Hospital, clutching a paper cup of vending machine coffee and watching the clock tick past 8:40 p.m., wondering if the doctor would ever call her name. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above, and the smell of antiseptic floated through the air like a reminder that this place was where people came when life stopped making sense. Lily had only come because her chest had been tight all afternoon, probably from stress, probably from skipping lunch again during her shift at the diner. She worked double shifts most days now, saving every dollar she could, but the city of Chicago had a way of draining money faster than she could earn it. Around her, the waiting room had been full of quiet anxiety, parents rocking restless children, an older couple whispering to each other, a man in a business suit pacing near the windows while checking his phone. Then everything changed when an elderly man sitting a few chairs away suddenly began breathing too fast, his hands shaking as panic overtook him. People looked up but didn't move, unsure what to do. Lily didn't think about it. She set her coffee down, stepped beside him, and spoke gently the way she remembered her mother doing years ago. "Hey, it's okay. Slow breaths. Look at me. All right," she had said, guiding his breathing, counting softly until the trembling eased. Within minutes a nurse arrived and wheeled him away, thanking Lily quickly before disappearing through the swinging doors. The room slowly returned to its low murmur of voices and tired sighs, and Lily assumed that was the end of it. But someone had been watching the entire moment. Now that someone stood a few feet in front of her in the quiet corridor outside the waiting area. He was tall, early 30s maybe, wearing dark blue scrubs and a white coat with a name stitched neatly over the pocket, Dr. Ethan Carter. Even Lily, who rarely followed medical news, recognized the name. Ethan Carter was the neurosurgeon people talked about on local news when a miracle surgery happened. The kind of doctor whose schedule was booked months in advance. The kind of man who definitely didn't talk to waitresses from the south side of the city. Yet here he was looking directly at her, his expression calm but strangely urgent. Lily blinked, still trying to process the words he had just spoken. "I'm sorry, what?" she asked, half laughing because surely this had to be some misunderstanding. But Ethan didn't laugh. His gaze remained steady, thoughtful, as though he had already considered every possible outcome of this conversation. Outside the windows at the end of the hall, a light November rain tapped gently against the glass, blurring the orange glow of the streetlights below. Somewhere down the corridor a machine beeped steadily, and a nurse pushed a cart past them without paying attention. The hospital continued moving around them like a living machine, yet in that small pocket of silence it felt as if time had paused. Ethan lowered his voice slightly, leaning closer so only she could hear. "My grandfather is upstairs," he said, "and he believes I'm getting married tonight." Lily stared at him, certain she had stepped into someone else's life by mistake. "That's a strange thing to say to a stranger," she replied carefully. Ethan's mouth curved into the faintest hint of a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You helped that man in the waiting room," he said. Most people just looked away. Lily shrugged awkwardly. Anyone would have helped. Ethan shook his head once. "No, most wouldn't." He glanced briefly toward the elevators at the end of the hall, as if measuring how much time he had left before something important slipped away. Then he looked back at her, his voice softer but more certain this time. "I know this sounds unbelievable," he said quietly, "but if you agree to pretend to be my wife for just one night, you might save more than one life tonight." Lily felt her heartbeat quicken, not from fear exactly, but from the strange gravity of the moment. She had come to the hospital worried about a tight chest and a stack of unpaid bills waiting on her kitchen counter. Now a millionaire doctor she had never met was asking her to marry him before the night was over. And somehow, despite every logical thought telling her to walk away, she had the uneasy feeling that this impossible conversation was only the beginning of something much bigger than either of them expected. The hallway felt quieter after Ethan finished speaking, as if even the hospital lights were waiting for Lily to respond. She folded her arms slowly, trying to steady the strange swirl of thoughts in her mind. "Dr. Carter," she said carefully, pronouncing the name that everyone in Chicago seemed to recognize. People usually ask for a phone number first before proposing marriage. For a brief moment something like amusement flickered in Ethan's eyes, but it faded almost immediately into the same calm seriousness she had seen when he spoke to patients in the waiting area. I understand how this sounds, he replied, but I would not ask if there were any other option. Lily glanced toward the elevators he had looked at earlier. The stainless steel doors reflected the pale hospital lighting, and above them a digital clock read 8:57 p.m. The night outside the windows had grown darker, the rain now falling in a steady whisper against the glass. What exactly do you mean when you say he believes you are getting married tonight? She asked. Ethan took a slow breath before answering, as though choosing his words with the same precision he used in surgery. My grandfather raised me, he said quietly. He built Carter Medical Group from a 2-room clinic into the largest private hospital network in the Midwest. He also made one unusual condition in his will. Lily tilted her head slightly. Let me guess, she said. The family fortune goes to whoever brings him a grandchild first. Ethan shook his head once. Not quite. The leadership of the entire hospital system transfers to me only if I am married before he passes away. Lily blinked, unsure whether to laugh or feel sorry for him. And you think pretending to marry a stranger in a hospital hallway will convince him? Ethan looked toward the elevators again. He is upstairs in the cardiac wing, he said. He asked to meet my fiancée tonight. The doctors believe he may only have a few hours left. His voice did not break, but Lily noticed the way his fingers tightened slightly against the sleeve of his white coat. For the first time she saw something beneath the composed surface of the famous surgeon standing in front of her. Not arrogance. Not desperation exactly. Something closer to quiet determination mixed with a hint of fear. You have to understand, Ethan continued, lowering his voice. If I lose control of the hospital, it does not just affect me. Thousands of employees work there. Thousands of patients rely on the programs my grandfather started. The board members who would take over care more about profit than care. Lily stared at him, the weight of his explanation slowly settling over her. So you need a temporary wife to impress your grandfather before midnight, she said slowly. Ethan nodded once. Just for tonight. No ceremony. No paperwork. Just a conversation so he can see that I am not alone. Lily rubbed her temple, half convinced she was still sitting in the waiting room dreaming this whole conversation. Dr. Carter, she said, I am a waitress who lives in a 400-square-foot studio apartment with a leaky kitchen sink. I do not own anything that looks remotely like fiancé material. Ethan's expression softened slightly. The way you spoke to that man earlier, he said, told me everything I needed to know. Lily exhaled slowly, glancing down the long corridor where nurses moved quietly from room to room. The hospital felt enormous in that moment, full of strangers carrying invisible stories through its bright, white halls. She had come here worried about a tight chest and a long work week ahead. Now a decision she had never imagined stood right in front of her. If I say yes, she asked carefully, what exactly happens next? Ethan met her eyes with calm certainty. You take the elevator with me, he said. You meet my grandfather. And for one night, Lily Harper, you become Mrs. Carter. The elevator ride felt longer than it should have, even though the digital panel above the door showed only a few floors passing by. Lily stood beside Ethan in silence, listening to the faint mechanical hum as the elevator climbed toward the cardiac wing. She folded her hands together in front of her, suddenly aware that her diner uniform smelled faintly of coffee and maple syrup. Compared to the polished marble floors and glass walls of the hospital, she felt completely out of place. You know, she said slowly, watching the numbers change from 4 to 5, most people buy dinner before asking someone to pretend to marry them. Ethan glanced toward her briefly, the corner of his mouth lifting just slightly. If tonight ends well, he said calmly, I will owe you dinner for the rest of my life. Lily let out a quiet breath that might have been a laugh, though the nervous flutter in her stomach did not disappear. You still have not explained why you chose me, she said. There are probably dozens of people in this building who look a lot more convincing as a doctor's fiancé. Ethan looked forward again, his reflection faintly visible in the brushed metal doors. Convincing is not what I needed, he replied. I needed someone kind. The elevator slowed with a soft chime, and the doors opened into a quieter hallway lined with large windows overlooking the city. The rain had almost stopped now, leaving the streets below shining with reflections of yellow streetlights and passing headlights. The cardiac floor was calmer than the busy emergency department below, with only a few nurses moving quietly between rooms. Lily hesitated as she stepped out of the elevator, suddenly realizing how real this situation had become. "Before we go any further," she said, turning slightly toward Ethan, "there is something I need to understand." Ethan waited patiently. "If this is just pretending," Lily continued carefully, "then what happens after tonight?" Ethan paused for a moment before answering. "After tonight," he said quietly, "our lives return to normal." Lily studied his face, searching for any hint of uncertainty, but his expression remained composed. Still, something in his tone made her believe he had already thought through every possible outcome. "So I walk out of here tomorrow," she said slowly, "and we both forget this ever happened." Ethan nodded once. "Yes." Lily let the silence stretch for a few seconds before speaking again. "And your grandfather will believe I am your wife, because we say so?" Ethan gave a small shake of his head. "My grandfather built hospitals for 60 years, he said. He can read people better than most surgeons read medical charts." Lily raised an eyebrow. "That does not sound very reassuring." Ethan met her eyes again, his voice softer now. "That is why I need you to be yourself." Lily looked down at the simple silver ring she wore on her right hand, the only piece of jewelry she owned that had not come from a discount rack. The idea of meeting the founder of an entire hospital network while pretending to be someone she was not felt almost ridiculous. "Dr. Carter," she said, "this plan feels a little like jumping into deep water without knowing how cold it is." Ethan nodded slightly. "That is a fair comparison." Then he added quietly, "There is just one condition." Lily crossed her arms again, sensing the seriousness in his voice. "Of course there is," she said. "There is always a condition." Ethan looked down the hallway toward a room at the far end where a soft light glowed through partially closed blinds. "If you agree to help me tonight," he said slowly, "you must promise not to ask about my past." Lily frowned, surprised by the request. "Not ask about your past?" she repeated. Ethan nodded. "Not tonight. Not tomorrow. Not ever." Lily searched his face again, noticing for the first time the faint shadow of exhaustion beneath his eyes, the kind that did not come from a long shift alone. "That seems like an unusual rule for a marriage," she said gently. Ethan gave a quiet breath that sounded almost like a tired laugh. "It is an unusual marriage." Lily glanced toward the glowing room at the end of the corridor, then back at the man standing beside her. Somewhere deep inside, she felt the strange sense that she was standing at the edge of a story she had never expected to be part of. Finally, she straightened her shoulders and looked at him with calm determination. "All right, Dr. Carter," she said softly. "Let us go meet your grandfather." The walk down the quiet hallway felt strangely ceremonial, as if Lily and Ethan were stepping onto a stage where everyone else already knew their roles except them. The soft glow from the room at the end of the corridor grew brighter with each step, and Lily could feel her heartbeat echoing gently in her chest. Ethan slowed as they approached the door, his hand briefly resting against the polished wood frame as though gathering his thoughts. Through the partially open blinds, Lily could see the silhouette of an older man resting in the hospital bed, the steady rhythm of medical monitors filling the room with quiet reassurance rather than urgency. Ethan glanced at her once more, his voice calm but sincere. "His name is William Carter," he said softly. "He built everything you see in this hospital." Lily nodded slowly, suddenly aware that she was about to meet someone whose decisions had shaped thousands of lives, including the one standing beside her. Ethan pushed the door open gently, and the warm light of the room spilled into the hallway. The man in the bed looked older than Lily expected, his silver hair neatly combed, his sharp eyes surprisingly alert despite the thin oxygen tube resting beneath his nose. The moment Ethan stepped inside, the older man's gaze shifted toward him with unmistakable recognition. "You are late," William Carter said in a voice that carried both age and authority, like someone who had spent decades giving instructions that people obeyed. Ethan walked closer to the bed with a respectful smile. "Traffic," he replied lightly, though Lily could sense the quiet emotion beneath his composed tone. William's eyes moved past him then, landing on Lily with sudden curiosity. For a long moment, he simply studied her, the way Ethan had warned he might. Lily felt as though she were standing in front of a judge who could see every hidden thought she had ever tried to conceal. Then Ethan turned slightly and reached for her hand, his fingers warm and steady as he gently drew her closer to the bed. "Grandfather," he said, "I would like you to meet Lily." Lily swallowed once before speaking, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "It is very nice to meet you, Mr. Carter." The older man watched her carefully. Then the faintest smile touched the corners of his mouth. "William," he corrected gently. "Anyone brave enough to marry my grandson deserves to use my first name." Lily felt the weight of Ethan's hand tighten slightly around hers, a subtle reminder of the role they were playing. She glanced toward him for half a second before returning her attention to the man in the bed. William Carter's sharp eyes moved between them slowly, taking in the way they stood side by side. "So," he said after a moment, "this is the young woman who convinced the busiest surgeon in Chicago to finally settle down." Ethan let out a quiet breath that sounded almost like relief. "Something like that," he replied. William studied Lily again, but this time his gaze held warmth rather than suspicion. "Tell me something," he said thoughtfully. "How did the two of you meet?" For a brief moment Lily felt the room grow. Very still. She remembered Ethan's warning about the older man's ability to read people, and the importance of simply being herself. Taking a calm breath, she answered honestly. "In a hospital waiting room," she said softly. William raised his eyebrows with interest. "That sounds like the beginning of an unusual story." Lily smiled gently. "It was not planned." The older man chuckled quietly, the sound warm and approving. "The best things in life rarely are." His gaze then shifted toward Ethan again, and something deeper passed between them, a silent understanding that did not need explanation. William reached slowly toward the small bedside table where a simple wooden box rested beside a framed photograph of a much younger Ethan standing beside him in front of an old clinic building. With careful hands, he opened the box and lifted out a delicate ring that caught the light from the lamp. "Your grandmother wore this ring for 42 years, he said softly, looking at Lily. "I kept it safe, hoping one day I would see the right woman standing beside my grandson." Lily felt her breath pause as William held the ring out toward Ethan. The older man's eyes shone with quiet satisfaction. "It seems," he said warmly, "that day has finally arrived." For a moment the room fell completely silent except for the steady rhythm of the heart monitor beside William Carter's bed. Lily stared at the ring resting in Ethan's hand, its small diamond catching the warm glow of the bedside lamp. The stone was not flashy or oversized the way expensive jewelry in store windows usually looked. Instead, it carried a quiet elegance, the kind that suggested it had lived through many years and many stories. Ethan hesitated only briefly before turning toward her. His expression was calm, but Lily noticed the slight tension in his shoulders as though he understood how important this moment was for the man watching them. "Lily," he said gently, his voice softer than she had heard it before, "would you do me the honor of wearing this tonight?" The choice of words was careful, respectful, and perfectly balanced between truth and the story they were presenting. Lily looked down at the ring again, remembering the agreement they had made only minutes earlier in the hallway. Just one night. Just a conversation. Just enough to give an old man peace. She extended her hand slowly, hoping the small tremor in her fingers was not obvious. Ethan slid the ring onto her finger with quiet precision, the cool metal settling comfortably against her skin as if it had always belonged there. William Carter watched the moment with bright eyes that reflected both pride and relief. "Well," the older man said after a satisfied breath, "that answers my question." Lily glanced toward him with curiosity. "What question is that?" William smiled gently. "Whether my grandson had finally learned that the most important decisions in life cannot be scheduled on a calendar." Ethan shook his head with a faint laugh. "You never miss a chance to lecture me, do you?" William chuckled softly. "It is a privilege of age." The room relaxed slightly as the tension of the moment faded, and Lily felt the tight knot in her stomach begin to loosen. William leaned back against the pillows, studying her again, but with a warmer expression this time. "Tell me about yourself, Lily," he said kindly. A man like Ethan usually spends his life surrounded by medical charts and conference calls. It is refreshing to see someone new beside him. Lily hesitated briefly, unsure how much of the truth would fit inside their carefully constructed story. But she remembered Ethan's advice to simply be herself. "I work at a diner about 2 miles from here," she said honestly. "The morning shift mostly. A lot of coffee, a lot of pancakes." William's smile widened. "A diner," he repeated thoughtfully. That sounds far more interesting than most hospital board meetings. Ethan crossed his arms with playful disbelief. You have never even been to her diner. William gave him a knowing look. I do not need to visit to understand its value. Places like that are where real conversations happen. Lily could not help smiling at the comment. For the first time since stepping into the room, the situation felt less like a performance and more like an unexpected evening with a thoughtful stranger. William's gaze softened as he watched the two of them standing side by side. You know, he said quietly, I built my first clinic in a small building no bigger than a grocery store. Back then we treated people who could barely afford the bus ride to get there. He looked toward Lily again. Do not ever underestimate the importance of simple kindness. Hospitals may run on medicine, but healing usually begins with people who care. Lily nodded slowly, understanding the deeper meaning behind his words. Ethan glanced toward the window where the last traces of rain were sliding down the glass. For a brief moment the room felt almost peaceful, like a quiet pause between chapters of a much larger story. William watched them both carefully, then gave a gentle sigh of satisfaction. I am glad you are not alone anymore, Ethan, he said softly. A man can build many things in life, but nothing matters more than the person standing beside him when the work is done. Lily felt Ethan's hand rest lightly over hers, the ring glinting between their fingers as if sealing a promise that neither of them had expected to make only an hour earlier. The quiet comfort of the room lingered for a few more minutes as William Carter continued speaking with the calm satisfaction of a man who felt his life's work had finally come full circle. Lily noticed the way Ethan listened to him, not like the confident surgeon who gave instructions in an operating room, but like a grandson who still valued the wisdom of the person who raised him. The older man's breathing remained steady as he spoke about the early days of the hospital network, describing small clinics, long nights, and the determination it took to build something that served people who had nowhere else to go. Lily listened carefully, realizing that the entire hospital surrounding them had grown from those humble beginnings. Eventually a nurse stepped quietly into the room to check a few numbers on the monitor beside the bed. William noticed the gesture and gave a knowing smile. They do not want me talking too much tonight, he said gently. Doctors can be very protective when they believe their patient is important. Ethan smiled faintly at the comment. That is because you are important, he replied. William studied his grandson for a moment, then turned his gaze toward Lily again. Before you leave tonight, he said softly, I would like you to promise me something. Lily straightened slightly, surprised by the seriousness in his voice. What is that? She asked. William glanced briefly at the ring on her finger before meeting her eyes again. Take care of him, he said quietly. Ethan has spent his entire life taking care of everyone else. Lily looked toward Ethan instinctively, but the doctor was watching his grandfather with an expression that revealed more emotion than he had allowed himself to show all evening. I will try, she answered gently. William nodded as though satisfied with that simple promise. The nurse finished adjusting the monitor and gave Ethan a polite nod, signaling that the visit would need to end soon. Ethan stepped closer to the bed, placing his hand carefully over his grandfather's. You should rest, he said. William smiled with the calm acceptance of someone who understood the passage of time better than most. I will, he replied. Then his eyes shifted toward Lily once more. It was very good to meet you, Lily Harper, he said warmly. I am glad my grandson found you. Lily felt a strange mix of gratitude and humility at those words. I am glad I met you too, she replied softly. Ethan gave his grandfather's hand a final squeeze before stepping back. As he turned toward the door, Lily followed him quietly, the ring still warm against her finger. The hallway outside the room felt brighter after the gentle stillness inside. The door closed softly behind them, leaving the faint beeping of the monitor muffled by the walls. For several seconds neither of them spoke. Lily leaned lightly against the wall beside the door, letting out a slow breath she had not realized she was holding. Well, she said after a moment, glancing at the ring again. That may have been the most unexpected evening of my life. Ethan gave a quiet laugh that sounded more relaxed than before. Mine too, he admitted. Lily studied his face, noticing how the tension in his shoulders had eased now that the difficult part of the night was over. Your grandfather seems remarkable, she said. Ethan nodded slowly. He is the reason I became a doctor. Lily hesitated, remembering the condition he had mentioned earlier. She almost asked about the story behind that decision, but she stopped herself just in time. Instead, she looked down the long corridor toward the elevator where their strange arrangement had begun less than an hour earlier. "So," she said thoughtfully, "does that mean our performance is over now?" Ethan followed her gaze down the hallway. For a moment, he seemed to consider the question carefully before answering. "For tonight," he said quietly, "yes." Lily slipped the ring gently from her finger and held it out toward him, but Ethan did not take it right away. His eyes rested on the ring for a second before he looked back at her with a thoughtful expression. "You should keep it until morning," he said calmly. "Grandfather may ask the nurses about you." Lily raised an eyebrow with mild disbelief. "You mean our story might still be under review?" Ethan smiled faintly. "With him," he replied. "The story is never over that quickly." Lily looked down at the ring once more before sliding it back onto her finger. Neither of them realized yet that the quiet promise made inside that hospital room would soon change far more than just one evening. The elevator doors closed behind them with a soft metallic click, and for the first time that evening the hallway noise faded into a quiet mechanical hum as the elevator began to descend. Lily leaned lightly against the rail along the wall, studying the reflection of the ring on her finger in the polished steel doors. The small diamond caught the light every time the elevator shifted, sending tiny sparks across the metal surface. "You know," she said slowly, "this is probably the strangest shift I have ever had after leaving the diner." Ethan stood beside her with his hands loosely folded, the tension from earlier gradually replaced by a thoughtful calm. "You handled it well," he replied. Lily let out a soft laugh. "I pretended to be someone's wife for 10 minutes in front of one of the most powerful hospital founders in the Midwest." She tilted her head slightly toward him. "That is not exactly a normal Tuesday night." Ethan glanced briefly at the ring on her finger. "You were convincing," he said quietly. The elevator reached the lower floor and opened with a soft chime, revealing the wider hallway of the hospital lobby. The waiting room looked different now. Fewer people sat in the chairs, and the late hour had softened the energy of the place. A television in the corner played a quiet news broadcast while a janitor slowly pushed a cart across the polished tile floor. Lily stepped out first, glancing toward the row of chairs where she had been sitting earlier that evening with her paper cup of coffee. It felt like it had happened hours ago, instead of less than 2 hours. "So this is where our story officially ends," she said gently, turning back toward Ethan. Ethan nodded once, though something thoughtful lingered in his expression. "You helped me more than you realized tonight," he said. Lily waved a hand lightly, as if dismissing the idea. "I just stood there and smiled." Ethan shook his head. "You gave my grandfather peace." For a moment neither of them spoke. The quiet lobby carried the faint smell of fresh floor cleaner and distant coffee. Lily looked down at the ring again and slowly slipped it off her finger, holding it carefully between her thumb and forefinger. "I suppose this belongs back in the box," she said. She held it out toward Ethan. This time he accepted it, though he did not place it away immediately. Instead, he turned the ring slightly in his hand, watching the diamond catch the light. "He has been worried about me for years," Ethan said thoughtfully. "Tonight was the first time I saw him relax." Lily folded her arms loosely. "He seems like the kind of person who sees more than people expect." Ethan smiled faintly. "That is exactly why I was nervous about bringing a stranger upstairs." Lily raised an eyebrow playfully. "Yet somehow you trusted me anyway." Ethan met her gaze with quiet honesty. "Something about the way you spoke to that man in the waiting room made the decision easy." Lily felt a small warmth rise in her chest at the unexpected compliment. She looked toward the hospital entrance where the rain had finally stopped, leaving the sidewalks shining under the streetlights. "Well, Dr. Carter," she said after a moment, "I think our agreement has officially reached its expiration time." Ethan nodded slowly. "Yes." But instead of immediately walking away, he seemed to hesitate as if considering something further. Lily noticed the pause. "What is it?" she asked gently. Ethan slipped the ring carefully into his coat pocket before answering. "My grandfather has a habit of asking follow-up questions," he said. Lily tilted her head slightly. "Meaning?" Ethan looked toward the elevator for a brief moment before returning his attention to her. "Meaning he will probably ask the nurses about you tomorrow morning." Lily let out a small laugh. "So the mystery waitress might still be part of the story." Ethan gave a quiet nod. "Possibly." Lily glanced down at her watch, realizing her shift at the diner would begin again in less than 6 hours. Then I suppose if anyone asks, she said lightly, you can tell them your wife went home to get some sleep. Ethan studied her for a moment, then smiled in a way that felt warmer than any expression he had shown earlier that evening. That might be the first honest answer I have given all night. Lily stepped toward the glass doors leading outside, the cool night air visible beyond the entrance. Just before she pushed them open, she turned back once more. Good night, Dr. Carter, she said softly. Ethan watched her for a moment, as if memorizing the unexpected turn his evening had taken. Good night, Lily. Neither of them realized yet that the quiet goodbye in that hospital lobby would not be the last time their paths crossed. The cool night air brushed against Lily's face the moment she stepped outside the hospital doors, carrying with it the faint scent of rain and distant traffic. The streets of Chicago shimmered under rows of amber streetlights, each puddle reflecting the quiet rhythm of the city settling into the late hours. For a moment, she simply stood there on the sidewalk, letting the strange evening replay in her mind. Only a few hours earlier she had been sitting inside that building worrying about medical bills and a tight chest after a long shift pouring coffee for early commuters. Now she had just spent the evening pretending to be the wife of one of the most respected surgeons in the city. Lily let out a quiet breath and shook her head with a small smile, as if the thought itself sounded too unbelievable to say out loud. Across the glass doors behind her, she could still see Ethan standing in the lobby, his tall figure framed by the bright hospital lights. For a brief second their eyes met through the glass before he gave a polite nod and turned away toward the elevators again. Lily tucked her hands into the pockets of her light jacket and began walking down the sidewalk toward the bus stop 2 blocks away. The city was quieter now, but not asleep. A taxi rolled slowly past, headlights gliding across the wet pavement, while somewhere down the street a late train rumbled faintly above the rooftops. As she walked, she found herself thinking about William Carter's warm smile and the simple sincerity in his voice when he had asked her to take care of Ethan. The memory made her glance down instinctively at her hand, where the ring had rested earlier that night. Her finger felt strangely bare now, as though it still expected the cool circle of metal to be there. Lily reached the small bus shelter and sat down on the metal bench, watching the glowing hospital sign across the street. The letters Carter Medical Center shone brightly against the dark sky, a reminder of the enormous world that existed inside that building. She wondered briefly what Ethan was doing at that moment. Perhaps he had already returned upstairs to check on his grandfather. Perhaps he had already placed the ring safely back into the wooden box beside the hospital bed. Either way, the story between them had ended exactly where it had begun, with 2 strangers returning to their separate lives. A few minutes later the bus pulled up with a low hiss of air brakes. Lily climbed aboard and took a seat near the window, the warmth of the bus contrasting with the cool night outside. As the vehicle pulled away from the curb, she watched the hospital slowly fade into the distance behind them. Back inside the building, Ethan stepped into the elevator once more, pressing the button for the cardiac floor without hesitation. The quiet ride upward felt different this time, heavier with thoughts he had not allowed himself to consider earlier. When the elevator doors opened, the familiar hallway greeted him with the same soft lighting and calm stillness as before. Ethan walked toward his grandfather's room and paused briefly outside the door before entering. William Carter was awake, his eyes moving toward the doorway the moment Ethan stepped inside. The older man studied him for a moment with the knowing expression that had guided decades of decisions. You let her go home, William said gently. Ethan nodded once. She had work in the morning. William smiled faintly at that answer, then turned his gaze toward the empty chair beside the bed where Lily had been sitting earlier. That young woman has a good heart, he said quietly. Ethan remained silent for a moment before responding. Yes, he admitted softly. William watched him carefully, the corners of his eyes crinkling with quiet understanding. Sometimes life sends the right person into our path when we least expect it, he said. Ethan glanced toward the window where the last traces of rain were sliding slowly down the glass. For the first time since that strange proposal in the hallway, he allowed himself to consider a possibility he had pushed aside all evening. Somewhere across the city a bus carried Lily Harper toward a small apartment and an early morning shift at a diner. But the quiet certainty in his grandfather's voice made one thought impossible to ignore. Their story might not be finished yet. Morning arrived quietly over the city, carrying with it the pale golden light of a new day. Lily Harper stood behind the counter of the small diner where she worked, tying the strings of her apron as the smell of fresh coffee filled the air. The clock above the kitchen window read 6:30 in the morning, and the first wave of early commuters had already begun filling the booths along the windows. Plates clinked softly, the coffee machine hissed, and the low hum of conversation created the familiar rhythm of another ordinary day. Yet Lily could not stop thinking about the strange evening that had unfolded only a few hours earlier. Every time she reached for a coffee pot or set a plate of pancakes on the counter, the memory of the hospital room and William Carter's gentle voice returned to her mind. It felt almost like a dream, something that had happened in another life rather than the same city she now stood in serving breakfast. Across town at Carter Medical Center, Ethan Carter walked slowly through the quiet corridor of the cardiac wing. The early morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long reflections across the polished floor. Nurses moved quietly between rooms, exchanging soft greetings as the hospital began another day of careful routines. Ethan paused outside his grandfather's room before stepping inside. William Carter was awake, resting comfortably against the pillows with the same calm expression he had worn the night before. When he saw Ethan enter, the older man smiled with quiet understanding. "Good morning," William said gently. Ethan pulled a chair beside the bed and sat down. "Good morning." For a moment neither of them spoke, the silence filled only by the distant sounds of hospital activity beginning outside the room. Then William's thoughtful eyes studied his grandson once more. "Have you spoken to your wife today?" he asked calmly. Ethan let out a soft breath, half amused and half thoughtful. "Not yet." William nodded slowly, as though he expected that answer. "You should," he said. Ethan leaned back slightly in the chair, considering the suggestion. "Grandfather," he said carefully, "last night was only meant to give you peace of mind." William's smile remained warm but knowing. "Sometimes peace of mind leads to unexpected truths," he replied. Ethan looked down briefly at his hands, remembering the quiet determination in Lily's voice and the kindness she had shown a complete stranger in the waiting room. "She has her own life," he said. William nodded. "Of course she does." The older man's voice softened slightly. "But life has a curious way of bringing people together for a reason." Ethan glanced toward the window where sunlight reflected off the glass buildings of downtown Chicago. Somewhere out there Lily Harper was pouring coffee, greeting customers, and returning to the simple rhythm of her ordinary life. Yet the memory of her calm smile and steady presence lingered in his thoughts. After a moment Ethan stood up from the chair. "I should begin my rounds," he said. William nodded again, but his eyes held a quiet spark of satisfaction. "Do not forget what I told you," he said gently. Ethan paused at the doorway before leaving the room. The words echoed in his mind as he walked down the hallway toward the elevators. Outside the hospital, morning traffic moved steadily through the city streets while the diner 2 miles away filled with the cheerful noise of breakfast orders and clinking dishes. Lily stepped toward the counter carrying 2 fresh cups of coffee when the small bell above the diner door rang softly. She looked up automatically, expecting another regular customer from the neighborhood. Instead, she saw a tall man in a dark coat standing in the doorway, sunlight outlining his silhouette against the busy street outside. For a moment, she simply stared, surprised by the familiar face she had not expected to see again so soon. Ethan Carter gave a small polite nod as he stepped inside the diner, his calm voice carrying across the quiet room. "Good morning, Lily." And just like that, the story that had begun with a strange proposal in a hospital hallway found its way back to where it truly belonged, not in a contract or a promise made for one night, but in the quiet possibility of 2 lives choosing to begin something real together.